Well, I'd like to welcome everybody for being with us today. We're going to be talking about something that's near and dear to everybody's heart, at least it should be, and that's public safety support for law enforcement. We have a number of people that are going to be with me making some short presentations to all of you. Nick Odenath is the Ventura County President of the Deputy Sheriff's Association. Rob Kirsch is Santa Barbara County Deputy Sheriff Association Vice President. Dennis Cassidy is the former police chief of Paso Robles. And we're also going to hear from a short video from Catherine Pignatelli. She's a nurse. And unfortunately, she got called away this morning, but we have a short video presentation from her about her personal situation and her story. I want to remind you that we are on both Facebook and YouTube Live today, and you can use the comment button on Facebook to submit a question, or on YouTube, you can hit the chat button to submit a question. And we're going to be taking questions probably a little bit later, and you could ask me a question. All the questions will go through me, and then I'll either ask Dennis, Nick, or Rob if they'd like to pipe in on something. And we want to thank you for being with us. As a way of introduction, here on the Central Coast, we are literally considered rural communities. Santa Barbara County and San Luis Obispo County especially are less than 50% developed. And yet, in the last couple of months, we've had two shootouts in San Luis Obispo County, one in Paso Robles, Atascadero area, more than one actually there. And then just yesterday in my little town of Napomo. Whereas in Santa Barbara County, DA Joyce Dudley is prosecuting the largest gang trial in the history of California, vis-a-vis MS-13, which is an international crime cartel. And just this last week, we had a Ponga boat. I know Ponga and boat are redundant, but I can't help myself. We had a Ponga incident with one of the largest methamphetamine confiscations in history. And what was really disturbing, they've been dumping off Pongas off our coast, both counties, for quite some time. But this time, thanks to the stellar work of law enforcement, they busted a couple of dozen individuals. But one of the things I wanted to draw your attention to is a number of those people are locals. They lived here in our area, and I went to a seminar a couple of years ago sponsored by the same organization that does FBI and local training. I went to El Paso. And back then they told me that the Mexican drug cartels have people in every major city across the land. Well, the bottom line is a number of the people that were busted in that Ponga incident this last week lived in Goleta and Santa Maria. And then finally, Ventura. Ventura's probably had the most grievous incidences, including, we covered this on the show probably a year or two ago. A homeless guy went into a restaurant at the pier and just slit this man's throat while he was with his family in the afternoon. And then they had the mass murder at the nightclub there, where a multi-decade veteran lost his life. So the bottom line here, when we talk about law and order and public safety, we need to know we're talking about us. And with that, I'll talk more about these things later. I think what we're going to do right now is we're going to start with this short video from Catherine Pignatelli. And again, I want to welcome everybody. I don't know if Codendum has to run this or not, because I think my computer volume won't go up that high. So JT, can you run that? Do you have that video?
My name is Catherine Pignatelli, and I'm a nurse here in both San Luis Obispo and Santa Barbara counties. I have lived here in California most of my life and have chosen to stay to go to college and raise my children. I stayed on the central coast of California because of the kind people, the amazing weather, and the incredibly low crime rate in my area. Unfortunately, many unfavorable, damaging, and alarming things are going to be occurring with the new laws that have been passed. This not only affects myself and my family, but the community as well. In October 1980, my grandfather, an owner of the Napomo swap meet, Robert Folkerts, was murdered in cold blood by a man named Edward Joseph Prokop. My grandfather was a kind and generous man who would give the shirt off of his back for anyone who needed it. In a way, he did just that for Prokop. Prokop had stopped at the swap meet and spoke with my grandfather about needing work, needing a place to stay, and not having the necessary resources for his family. My grandfather offered Mr. Prokop a place to stay in return for working on the building in the swap meet. He learned my grandfather's routine of depositing money, asked for a ride by feigning a breakdown of his vehicle, and put a gun against my grandfather's head. He took the money, shot my grandfather in the head, and placed a jacket over his face and left him there. In May of this year, victim witness in the district attorney's office called me to inform my family of his eligibility for parole. They stated he is an extremely vicious, callous, and dangerous man with absolutely no remorse for his actions. He had also robbed a home after my grandfather's murder. Because of the new laws in place, the DA has asked my family to provide a victim impact statement in a last-ditch effort to keep this dangerous man in prison. Unfortunately, no amount of tears, pleading, or heartbreak could keep Mr. Prokop in prison. On May 22nd, 2020, he was granted parole. This man, who knows nothing but crime, murder, theft, will be sent out into the community. That means he could be your neighbor, your coworker, or potentially your friend, and you wouldn't even know. The impact this has had on my family and myself has been surreal, yet unmeasurable. Although I've always been aware of my surroundings, I am now constantly on edge and hypervigilant. My mother has had trouble sleeping, and my grandmother, who was my grandfather's wife, is reliving the horror all over again. We still aren't sure what danger awaits us in the coming years. This situation and others like it are why I support Andy Caldwell's determination and promise to keep dangerous people like Edward Prokop and other criminals in prison, and his relentless support for our local law enforcement. This is just one example of who will be released into our community and would potentially wreak havoc on our state. Andy Caldwell is the answer, and he will restore our livelihoods, communities, freedoms, and safety.
Wow, I remember that killing. I've lived on the Central Coast for 52 years. I want to go to Dennis Cassidy, Chief Cassidy, retired Paso Robles police chief. So one of the things that people may not know is the guy that shot at Paso Robles police station and then ended up getting in a shootout. It actually committed a crime up in Monterey and was released, because right now California has this zero bail system. And folks, one of the things that I want to emphasize is what is happening in California right now and what has been happening since AB 109, Prop 47, and Prop 57 is just a small taste of what people want to do nationwide. And so they've been asking for zero bail for a long, long time, and they use the COVID crises as the excuse to literally open up the jail cells. And this guy had been busted in Monterey County. They let him out, and he came down here and nearly murdered several deputies. Dennis, would you like to talk to us a little bit about what you know about that incident?
Yes, thank you, Andy. That individual was well known to public safety for some time. He'd been in and out of contacts with law enforcement, and The weapon that he used in that shooting was taken in a burglary. He obtained the gun not through normal buying a gun, because he probably was not able to do so, but he stole that gun from a residence. That being said, that individual should not have been out on the street, both because of the crimes that he's committed, but also because of his mental health issues, his ability to judge right or wrong. Anyway, that gentleman, or shouldn't say gentleman, that suspect came down here to Paso Robles, and he was involved with not just criminal activity, but also the homeless communities throughout the county and throughout the state. So, which is another issue. But he then, for whatever reason, decided to shoot at the police station, and other law enforcement agencies were summoned to the area to assist. And he laid in wait and ambushed a San Luis Obispo County Sheriff's deputy, injuring him severely, shooting him in the face. And then he eluded capture for a couple of days before he was involved in another shootout just south of Paso Robles in the riverbed. Individual should not have been out. And you know, I feel for Catherine and her family. It's a way too familiar story of what's happening and the people that are being injured and killed by people that are released early or not even kept in custody for certain crimes. So that's a significant issue that our country needs to deal with. And certain states, like California, for example, and the government that is governing now in California don't seem to see it that way. They seem to think it's okay to let these people out.
You know, one of the things, do we know how those deputies are faring? They got shot.
Yes, they're doing well. The one deputy that was shot in the face, of course, is not back to work. Several of the other deputies are still recovering, but they did not suffer life-threatening injuries, luckily. And but you know, the other issue too is what they had to go through and the resources they had to use. Thank goodness that we had those resources, but the resources they had to use to apprehend this man without further injury to other people, citizens or law enforcement. You know, they did a great job.
Dennis, have you heard anything more about what happened in Napomo yesterday? All what I'm getting off of it is some inside accounts from Facebook, from people that were there, people who I know in the community. Have you heard anything officially about that?
No, Andy, I have not heard anything in depth or any factual information released yet regarding the Napomo incident.
Okay, let's go to Nick. Nick Odenath is the president of Ventura County Deputy Sheriff's Association. Thank you for being with us and for serving. Could you talk a little bit about some of the, and not, well, they're fairly recent crimes that we had, including the loss of the officer who responded to the shootout at the country music nightclub down there. And then also the homeless guy that committed that heinous murder in broad daylight in Ventura.
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you, Andy, for having me here. And thank you for your support for public safety. So yeah, in November of 2018, we had an active shooter incident at the Borderline Bar and Grill in the city of Thousand Oaks. One of the first on scene was Sergeant Ron Helis, who, after hearing the shooting and seeing people that had been shot, went inside to address the issue, and ultimately was fatally shot at the steps of the Borderline Bar and Grill, as additional responders were still en route. And so we had several of our community members lost their lives as well during that incident. It was something that still touches a lot of people's hearts here locally, and for our agency, for our members, it's something that's still difficult to deal with. And in regards to the homeless individual, that was in the city of Ventura. Again, that was a few years ago. That was not our jurisdiction. It was the Ventura Police Department that handled that particular incident. But what I do know is that, yes, a homeless individual approached a family that was having a meal at one of the local eateries in the city of Ventura, and pulled out a knife and literally slit the throat of the father that was there in front of their family, and then left the area.
You know, the bottom line here is, you know, we're going to talk more about this, is that California, when we're going to be talking later about this thing called the Breathe Act. The Breathe Act is nationally, is a national program that actually takes some of the things that we've already been doing in the last 10 years in California and puts them on steroids. So we're going to be talking about this in a little bit. As far as the ideologue's version of justice is you send a social justice warrior or social worker to go counsel these people, when in reality, and I'll be mentioning this later, we are spending an absolute fortune trying to counsel people through social services, alcohol, drug, and mental health services already. And this is what they're not addressing. Let's go to Robert Kirsch. He's Santa Barbara County Deputy Sheriff Association Vice President. Rob?
Good morning. Thanks for having me, Andy.
Thank you. So Santa Barbara County had the largest MS-13 gang-banging trial in the state history. And you had the largest, I think the largest meth bust is one of the largest in the country. Could you talk a little bit about what's been going on here in Santa Barbara County?
Well, the MS-13 trial in itself is really taxing our agency and really the DA's office. I mean, it's costing us a fortune to try this case. It is the biggest gang murder case in the county's history. But just because there's so many defendants, it's gonna be a hard one to get tried, and it's gonna take several years to try the case. With the Panga boat that came in a couple days ago, that's still really ongoing. There's a lot of agencies involved. The federal government's involved, and so out of the 20.
Rob, your internet slowed down there for a little bit. You know what, we'll come back to Rob in a little bit. Let's go to Robert Lacey. He just joined us. He's from Ventura County DSA as well. Rob, welcome. We don't have your camera on, Rob. Robert, are you there? Well, we'll come back to both of these guys. Let me share something here with you right now. Just some of the things that I've been talking to you about. These are op-eds and radio commentaries we just did recently. AB 109 was used to dump prisoners from our state prisons into county jails. Most of the county jails are already full. So because they were already full and they had to take these state prisoners in, they didn't have enough room in the jail, so to speak. So a lot of people don't get booked that should be booked and or don't have their full sentence. But one of the things that California did, and I have this here in the red, is they changed the definition of violent crimes to downgrade the sentencing of violent crimes. And specifically here, and can you guys see this screen? Can they see the screen? Nick, can you see that?
Yes, I can, Andy.
Okay. So for instance, here in California, all the following crimes are no longer considered violent: assault with a deadly weapon, domestic violence, battery with serious bodily injury, solicitation to commit murder, rape, sodomy, oral copulation of an unconscious person or by way of date rape, drugs, human trafficking of a minor for sex, active participation in a street gang, exploding a destructive device with intent to commit injury, arson of forest land causing physical injury, and finally adding insult to injury, assault with a deadly weapon on a police officer. And then, as you know, they want to replace cops with social workers. This right here, this is just Santa Barbara County. San Luis Obispo County is probably spending half as much again because it's a smaller county. The Social Services Department in Santa Barbara County has 750 employees. It's the largest department. There are already more social workers than there are cops. 750 employees, a budget of 181 million a year, and they have 148,000 quote unquote clients. That is 1 out of 3 residents are already being served. And when you talk about kids, it's 68% of all the children in the county. Multiply this by thousands. This is 1 county in the United States of America. And the other thing, I wrote a piece about the war against cops. And this is the MS-13 case that Robert was talking about. They were originally charged with 10 homicides, 14 attempted murders, and many other violent crimes. They're facing 50 felony counts of murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and criminal street gang activity. Now, this is one of those things where Salud Carbajal comes into play. With Salud Carbajal, he has introduced a bill that would prevent our federal government from quote unquote denaturalizing somebody. So as I mentioned, in this Ponga bus from just last week, several of the residents here locally were part of that drug bust. Specifically, some of them came to unload the Ponga and then go distribute the drugs. Well, let's say they found out that these Mexican cartel members or what have you, but let's say that one of these people a year ago had gotten citizenship, and now we know they're working for the Mexican drug cartels. Well, under Salud Carbajal's bill, we would not be able to denaturalize that person and kick them back from wherever they came from. It wants them to be a permanent citizen and resident of the United States. And so with that, I don't know if we have any questions right now as far as of any of the speakers. Robert Lacey, did we get you hooked in yet? I don't know yet. I don't know. Cadendum, I see him on my screen, but I don't see or hear him. Maybe he just wanted to join us. Well, one of the things I wanted to talk with you about is this thing called the Breathe Act. So what we have here in California is, again, AB 109, Prop 47, Prop 57. Now we have no bail, and we have release of prisoners. Thousands of prisoners are getting released due to quote unquote COVID. And as Rahm Emanuel used to say, don't let a crisis go to waste. They have wanted no bail, and in fact, there's a bill. There actually was a law about no bail, and there's a bill to repeal it on this year's ballot measure. And what this basically means is that when somebody gets arrested, sometimes the judge will say that this person's not eligible for bail. They may be a flight risk, or they just may be super, super dangerous, and or they may set the bail at varying amounts, but they don't want that bail system to be in place. They want people to, if they're booked, to be free until they're proven guilty. And you can imagine, as our guest mentioned earlier, that when her grandfather's, Catherine's grandfather's murderer is out, that family not only relives it, but they are frightened by virtue of the fact that this person's back on the streets. And that's a guy they're getting out of prison for a number of other reasons. Nick, do you have anything to talk about or speak on as far as this no bail? How frustrating is it for a cop to do all this work to go arrest somebody and they're back out on the street before you're back out on patrol?
Yeah, we've heard from a number of our members over this specific issue. And we've seen a decline in our jail population by over 50%, literally, as a result of zero bail. And in many cases, we have our members who are booking individuals that have committed some fairly serious crimes in our community, and they're being released before the report is even being drafted. And that's how quick they're back out on the streets. So it's a serious concern, safety concern for our members and for our community.
It really is. Dennis, Chief Cassidy, would you have anything to say on this?
Yeah, I agree with Nick. These people are back on the street. Paso Robles police just arrested two fellas this past week with a large amount of drugs in their vehicle. And because of the new laws, they were cited and released. They seized all the drugs and weapons and so forth. But these people are back out doing their thing. And whether or not they'll show up for court's another question.
Yeah, that's the other thing. As one of the things that happened with this new outlook on criminality is when we lower the felonies to misdemeanors and the misdemeanors to citations, the penalty for not showing up for a citation is another citation. So we literally have tens of thousands of failures to appear because they're no longer afraid of being arrested. And even if they're arrested, they're not afraid of going to jail. And even if they go to jail, they're not afraid of being made to stay there. And what we're talking about is a fundamental breakdown of law and order. One of the things that one of our participants today wanted us to raise, and I want to remind people that if you're on Facebook, if you're watching this Facebook Live, go to the comment button, type in your comment, and we'll read them. And or if you're on YouTube, go to the chat button, and you can send your chat in. One of the things I wanted to bring up, and this is just absolutely, completely frightening. So we know that Tiana Arata was arrested and charged with, I think, 5 felonies for leading the Black Lives Matter protest rally that included shutting down the freeway, terrorizing at least one 4-year-old vis-a-vis having the back window of their car smashed in, detaining people, which is a form of kidnapping. Well, we have a legal system. Now, I don't try people in the court of public opinion, but she was the leader. It's clear that she was the leader, along with the help of Heidi Harmon, I might mention, the mayor of San Luis Obispo. She was the leader of this thing, and she's been charged. Now, or at least the charges have been recommended. I haven't heard as of yet whether Dan Dow has decided to press those charges. I think that's coming up, and he's got a little bit of time to do that. But notwithstanding that, the bottom line, an attorney from back in the back east sends Dan Dow a threat. He uses the word threat in the transmission. Drop the charges or else. Now, folks, in America, we don't respond to mob action. We have a court of law. Lady Justice is supposed to be blind, and she's supposed to be holding just scales. And everybody has a right to a fair trial, court-appointed attorney, and a jury of peers to determine guilt or innocence. That's our system, and it works pretty darn well. It does not perfect, but it works really well. But we don't tell district attorneys drop the charges or else. That's what happened here. Furthermore, they threatened in writing to go to District Attorney Dan Dow's house at 3 a.m. in the morning to try to intimidate him and his family. This is not a singular incident. They showed up at the District Attorney of Los Angeles's door at 5:30, knocked on her door. She's a Black District Attorney of Los Angeles, first female Black District Attorney of LA. Knocking on her door, they had threatened her family and her life as well. Her husband opens a door with a handgun and tells these people to get off my porch. Are the people that intimidated or attempted to intimidate the DA being prosecuted? No. Her husband is being prosecuted for waving a gun at these people on his porch, and he was on his own porch when he told them to get off his porch. And folks, the problem here is what we're seeing here is a fundamental breakdown of law and order and respect for our institutions, that people are being threatened. And if they can do that to the District Attorney of Los Angeles or the District Attorney of San Luis Obispo, where does that leave the rest of us? Hey, Rob Kirsch, we lost you a little while ago. I wanted to give you the chance to finish up what you were talking about.
Sorry about that. It dropped me for some reason. But anyways, I would back what Andy's saying about, the fundamental breakdown of our institutions. Right now, I think our staffing levels, especially at the patrol level, are probably the lowest they've been. Just due, shutting, taking funded positions away. And this was way before any of this happened. So our numbers are probably the lowest they've been in a long time as far as detectives working cases, narcotics detectives, people on patrol. Our numbers are really low. And to think that we could, cut even more is just crazy to me. And to make this work, we need more staff. We need more deputies and officers on the street to really enhance community-oriented policing. We need more deputies in the jail to better care for the inmates that are in custody. And to think that we could be taking funding away from our agencies is just crazy to me.
Well, one of the things I want to talk to all of you guys about, first of all, what we saw up in Portland especially is attack on federal buildings. And the cops up there, they weren't even protecting their own buildings. They were getting firebombed. They abandoned some of their own precincts. But with respect to, for instance, protecting the federal buildings, Trump got criticized for sending in federal agents, but it was a federal court building he was trying to protect. Do you know that, for instance, if Black Lives Matter follows through on their threat to come down like a load of bricks on San Luis Obispo, if in fact Tiana is prosecuted or even charged as recommended, do you know if who would make that call? Would Ian Parkinson make the call? Would the police chief of San Luis make the call to ask for backup so that San Luis doesn't get firebombed like Portland did? Does anybody know the answer to that?
Yeah, Andy, the jurisdiction affected, the police chief would have that authority, but also with the assistance of Ian Parkinson, the sheriff, he could make the call also. So I would believe that, if it's in the city limits of San Luis Obispo, when it's not spilling out into the county, it would be the jurisdiction of the police chief. But they work close together, the police chief and the sheriffs. They would jointly come up with a plan to protect the citizens of San Luis Obispo.
I want to go back to something I asked Nick earlier to give Rob and Dennis and Nick another chance to do this. And that's about morale. Cops are now considered the bad guy. Cops are considered the problem. Cops must be defunded. Cops must no longer have defensive weapons such as tear gas or armored vehicles or even bulletproof vests. They want you to be sitting ducks. They want you to go away. They want to blame you that you're instruments and implements of racism. We already had a lot of policemen retiring early, going to other jurisdictions. Talk about the morale on law enforcement, please.
Well, I can say that I think a lot of these young guys are, I wouldn't say it's the morale, it's the fact that they're scared to do their job. Because you're right, they're sitting ducks. When you hear some of the older guys in our agency talk, it's the retirement talk that, I might just pull the plug now. There's a lot of guys, which we really can't afford because we're such a young agency right now. I think 70% of our agency has under 5 years of experience, just due to retirements, and that's just the way our makeup is. So I think the morale is mediocre, but it's the guys are scared to go out and do their jobs. We have COVID, we have all this rhetoric, this anti-cop rhetoric. And I think, when you combine all of it, it's just a scary time to be in law enforcement.
Nick, do you have anything to add?
The only thing I would say is in hearing from our members, we have also seen a significant drop in morale as it relates to the reform talk, specifically as it relates to the talk about defunding. And kind of like Robert had mentioned, a lot of jurisdictions have seen cuts over the course of the last several decades related to cuts in budget. And so to talk about taking additional funds away for other means within the government is concerning, because essentially what that translates into for our members and really for many members across LE jurisdictions in California is a reduction in resources, a reduction in training. So you have less trained individuals out there, and then a reduction in recruiting high quality officers to come in when you do have attrition. And those are the concerns that we've got.
And Andy,
Dennis, go ahead.
What Rob and Nick said, what's important is not to cut funding to public safety at this time. It's to continue funding for those very reasons, to be able to train, to be able to provide the appropriate equipment, to have the right number of staff to be able to handle calls for service. When I retired, we had 45 sworn officers in our agency, small agency. But afterwards, that dropped down to under 30 at one point. And so all the programs, all the beneficial programs for the community were cut. They were eliminated. And we struggled to provide service to the community. I mean, our DARE programs went away, our community services programs went away, our community-oriented policing went away, our school resource officers went away, just so we had enough people to respond to calls for service, emergency calls for service. And that's a shame, because you don't get better policing, you get tired policing, you get people struggling just to maintain the basic. And that's what people don't understand, is when you take away that funding from public safety, you're hurting the community as a whole.
So I want to bring up another issue, and I want to apologize for the people on Facebook. I've been reading your questions and asking them, but I forgot to name your name. So I apologize. We've we had questions from Neil and others on that we've been talking about. And I want to remind you again, if you're on Facebook, use the comment section. On YouTube, use the chat to ask questions. So I want to bring something up. This, if I was a cop, my head would explode. So you had the mayor of Olympia, Washington, for instance, saying, I support the Black Lives Matter, until they showed up on her porch. And then she said, these people are terrorists. You had the same thing up in Seattle. This last week, the mayor of Chicago, which is the hellhole murder capital of America, I don't know how many years in a row, there's more people shot every weekend in Chicago than most other cities in a year. She obviously has been supporting the Black Lives Matter movement, but then she said this. She told the cops to keep them 1 block away from her own house. In other words, you're free to protest and rally wherever you want, but don't get within a block of my own house. The LA City Council, which has cut, I don't know how many hundreds of millions off of their police department, those city council members cut the police department, and then they hired private security details to protect them. So what you have here is you have these politicians egging on or praising the rioters, the looters, and what I'm going to call urban terrorists, but making sure they themselves are not going to be personally affected. How do you work for these people? Now, I know that Heidi Harmon's the only politician I know on the Central Coast that actually shows up and speaks at these rallies and marches with them. But you have other ones that are, for instance, Santa Barbara City Council has talked about cutting their police department. You've had people calling on the Board of Supervisors. They wanted to stop the construction of the new North County Jail, even though it's almost finished. How do you guys deal with this? Luckily, Ian Parkinson and Sheriff Bill Brown and the Sheriff in Ventura are all independently elected, but all the cops work for the city councils. How do you guys deal with the undermining by the people that are supposed to protect you and cover you, so to speak, for the job you're doing for all of us?
Well, Andy, I'll start this one. I think Bill Brown actually in our agency has done a pretty good job. He hasn't responded to any of the demands of Black Lives Matter or any of these other groups. He just hasn't responded at all. And he really hasn't got any flack for it. They've kind of left him alone. But if you look at like Santa Barbara City, they've been out there taking a knee with these people, and answering their demands, and they've kind of been persecuted for it, and it's never enough. And I think that's the key is once you give in, it's never going to be enough.
Right.
So I think our sheriff has done a good job, and really he's our department head. So the Board of Supervisors is going to do what they're going to do. And I think when it comes election time, and that you remember those people and who didn't support you and who doesn't. And that's why our associations are so important, and our relationships with these people are so important. But I think Bill Brown, our sheriff, and Ian Parkinson have done a good job.
Nick, what's happened in Ventura County?
In Ventura County, to be frank, we feel very fortunate. We do have a really good working relationship with our elected county officials as well as our contract city officials. And we haven't had those issues where there have been strong vocal talk against law enforcement as a whole. And so really our approach has been to have open dialogues with our city council representatives and our county representatives about the concerns that we've got about why, as we mentioned earlier, taking money away from a public safety resource is going to have an impact on the community, and why, feeding into some of the anarch movement that we've seen across the nation is only going to make matters worse for public safety.
One of the things that's really sad is that, I've been condemning all of this for months. A number of people have been condemning it, but unfortunately, people like Salute Carbajal, Heidi Harmon, the mayor of Santa Barbara, and a lot of them are silent, and or they're talking about how much they respect this movement and that this is, you know, Bernie Sanders, for instance, even this week at the DNC still called it a peaceful protest. There's a number of people in Congress that refuse to even acknowledge the violence that's been going on for over 60 days in places like Portland. Dennis, you are retired now, so you had the longest career of any of these other young men that are with this. Did you ever see any of this coming?
You know, we've had cycles throughout the time, but nothing to this. You know, this has been, I believe, a planned movement for a long time. And the way to break down our government is to initiate these types of behaviors and these types of socialist programs, or in many cases, Marxist and communist programs. So if you look at the history of those countries where this has occurred before, it's a long process, and it's a process of degrading government, degrading law enforcement, degrading social behavior in our communities, and then they get in a position of power because they think, the people think that they're going to get something good, but in the long run they get the worst public safety law enforcement they could ever have. If you look at law enforcement under a communist or a Marxist regime, you speak out with your right to free speech and you go away. So our people aren't really seeing it that way. Our voters need to understand that that we need to take a step and get back to you know, the rights that that are really mentioned in the Constitution, and how we preserve them.
Well, one of the things I want to say is a couple of weeks ago, I did a column where I quoted Karl Marx. There's this guy named Upton Sinclair back in the 1930s outlined part of this problem or program or proposal. And what I'm going to do right now, I'm going to talk a little bit about the Breathe Act and then come back to you, because everything we've been talking about and more is now being proposed as legislation for Congress. And well, let's see here. It looks like it disappeared. Oh, okay, let's see here. I'm gonna find this thing, the Breathe Act, if I can. Folks, that's how easy it is to find it. So I want you to, first of all, know, well, let me back up here for 1 second. This is the Breathe Act, and these are the champions of the Breathe Act. 2 members of the squad, Ayanna Pressley and Rashid Tlaib. Salute Carbajal has a 95% identical voting record as these 2 members, plus AOC has got a 100% voting record with Nancy Pelosi. So these are the functions of the Breathe Act. We're going to just cover this real quickly. This is Section 1, divesting federal resources from incarceration and policing and ending criminal legal system harms. Again, they're not worried about the public being harmed by criminals. They're concerned about the criminals' justice system harming the criminals. And so eliminate federal programs and agencies used to finance and expand the U.S. criminal legal system, such as community-oriented policing. We're going to talk to our men in law enforcement in a minute. Drug Enforcement Administration, Immigrations and Customs. They want non-punitive, non-carceral elements. In other words, they don't want people incarcerated. How are they going to make the money? They're going to reduce the Department of Defense budget. These are some of the things they want to, again, federal money goes to the state money goes to the locals. They want to, for instance, eliminate use of electronic monitoring, mandatory minimum sentencing laws, no more life sentences, abolishing 3 strikes laws, decriminalizing anything that has to do with crossing the border. They want to decriminalize and retroactively expunge drug offenses. They don't want police to be able to use facial recognition to identify criminals. There's all sorts of things that they want, banning stop and consent searches. They want to remove police, armed security, metal detectors, and other surveillance equipment from schools and government offices. And they want to abolish state gang databases. The list goes on and on and on as far as what they want to do here. And so I'm going to go back to the screen. And how possible would it be to do your job, Dennis, Nick, Robert, if any of these things, let alone all of them, got passed? Nick?
Well, I guess I'll go. Yeah, I'll go first.
Go
I
first.
mean, it's going to be. I mean, clearly, it would have a significant impact on just our simple ability to carry out our duties, especially for our federal partners, since this is a federal bill, that it would significantly impact their ability. For example, you mentioned the Ponga that hit the coast. I mean, if you talk about getting rid of an agency that handles drug enforcement federally, that's going to have a significant impact on the justice and seeking prosecution, and as well as the safety for the community members as those drugs enter that community. And that's just one example of the concerns that we have related to that, the Breathe Act.
Okay, Dennis?
Yeah, if a bill like that became law, it would significantly cripple law enforcement. But the other side of that is what it would do to the communities as a whole, where those communities would go and what they would become. And that's the sad part about it is people look at a small portion of something and think, oh, maybe that's a good idea to do this or that. But they don't look at the bigger picture, which is what is it going to do to them, their families, their neighbors, their community as a whole. And that's what would happen.
Rob?
Yeah, I would just piggyback on what Dennis said. I mean, it would impact our communities, and it would be horrible. And I mean, you see, crime isn't going away as it stands right now. I mean, we had an active shooter yesterday. We had 3,100 pounds of methamphetamine that got stopped coming into our communities. I mean, crime isn't going away. So to tie our hands behind our back to try to fight crime is it wouldn't be a good thing.
You know, one of the things that we have to mention, and I got to ask, were you guys able to see that screen? Did the screen share go up, Nick? Were you able to see
Yes.
it? Okay,
Yes, it did. Yep.
So I have some conflicting messages here. So let me say something that's really important is with regard to Salute Carbajal, our current congressman. First of all, I've not seen one instance where he's condemned the rioting, the looting, and the mayhem that's been going on in our society. And secondly, Presley and Tlaib were two of the ones that are planning to introduce. The entire squad said they endorsed the Breathe Act. I don't think they formally introduced it into Congress yet. But the bottom line, and this is really sad, I've known Salute Carbajal for over 20 years. I knew him as having a few moderate tendencies when he was at the Board of Supervisors, which is where I was at with him every Tuesday for 20 years. But since he's gone to Washington, he has become just a loyal foot soldier. He hasn't got any bills passed, nor has he ever stood up or stood out against these trends. And so I can expect if Salute Carbajal sees the Breathe Act introduced, he'll do whatever Nancy Pelosi tells him to do. And what's happening, and this is what happened in this last election, people don't know this. The squad ran 40 candidates against 40 incumbent Democrats. There is a civil war going on within the Democratic Party. And to the degree that the squad gains more and more members that of the radical fringe element that they represent, the more mainstream they become. They won't be the fringe, they will become the mainstream. And thus far, Salute Carbajal has never stood up to them. He's voted with them almost 100% of the time. So we've got a real problem in terms of law and order, public safety. And I'll tell you this, I don't think law and order should be a partisan issue. We all want to have somebody show up when we call 911. We would rather not have to call 911 because law and order is being maintained by the presence of our men and women in uniform and by a criminal justice system that keeps the bad guys behind bars. When California had the 3 strikes law, there was a serious downturn in hardcore criminal activity because there's not that huge a number of people that are committing these crimes over and over and over. And of course, they want to get rid of all 3 strikes laws across the country, and ours has already been severely weakened. Do you guys have a comment on that in terms of the fact that that people aren't standing up for you? There's been rallies, and one of the questioners today said, how do we support you guys? There's been some rallies, but I know in Santa Barbara, one of the rallies that was called, law enforcement asked them not to do it because they didn't want the other side to show up in a big melee ensued. So how do we support you guys? And have you noticed any of the local representatives standing up for you? Not the sheriffs, but the elected representatives.
Yeah, that happens, when you have relationships with your city government, you have the ability to talk back and forth and create an understanding of what needs to be done as it relates to public safety. If you don't have that relationship, if those relationships don't exist, then it goes the other way. And, that seems to be the problem. The important thing is for law enforcement to continue to build relationships with their governing bodies, but also their communities. Their communities tell the government what they want, and it's the government's job to listen to their people. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, so that's another issue. But yeah, I think it's just relationship building with your community. Get your community behind your police department or your sheriff's department, and build relationships with your city councils, your supervisors, your mayors, your elected officials.
Do you guys, go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, just to piggyback really quickly on what Dennis said, a lot of it too is just education. Law enforcement is really a specialized assignment, it's a specialized career that requires thousands of hours of training just to get into this line of work. And so really educating the community and educating our representatives on the city, county, state, and national level is crucial. And having those relationships allows that process to take place.
Rob?
I would agree with what Nick and Dennis said. Here locally in Santa Barbara County, our elected officials in the county level, haven't really been out speaking against us. I think the one thing that we're looking at is they've seen the cost savings of letting everybody out of jail due to COVID. So we've seen a couple of them jump on that train, but to actually come out and speak against us and what we do, that really hasn't been happening.
What about speaking for you? What about saying that, hey, we respect these guys, we thank these men and women, we respect them, we're going to stand with them, we want them to have more training, we want them to have more protective equipment, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but I think I heard Joan Hartman speak at one of the meetings and saying that she thought we've done a great job in Isla Vista, but not really. I think a lot of them just stay quiet. But I think Doss Williams has really been the only one that he's been really hounding that funding for the jail. So that's really been the back end of it.
There's been a number of people on this. This is it's slightly off topic, but it's not. There's been a number of people to have asked, where is Salud? And then secondly, Christy on Facebook just asked, when will we debate Salud? And we've been wanting to debate. There was a debate scheduled in the first half of the election cycle, but Salud canceled that. He has promised to do 2 debates. That we don't have confirmation. KUIT has told us that they will host a debate on October 17th. We don't know if Salud's committed to that. They told us previously after he bailed on the last one that if he doesn't show up, they'll just ask me the questions. But anyway, that's the only one we've not heard from KSBY. And this is one of the things that I would want to debate is law and order, public safety, because as I mentioned, the Breathe Act has not been formally introduced into Congress, but one of the components of the Breathe Act, this issue of diverting law enforcement monies for reparations, banning the denaturalization process. Salud has signed on to those things. So I don't know if they will ever introduce the whole Breathe Act. But what they are doing is piecemealing it, and Salud signed on to at least a couple of the pieces of the Breathe Act. And one thing I could tell you is that even an organization like the League of Women Voters, which is nonpartisan, Salud rejected their request for a debate. Normally, in most situations, the Farm Bureau, the taxpayers, the League of Women Voters, various chambers of commerce will all sponsor a debate. He's already rejected all of those. And at a minimum, he said he would do 1 or 2 television debates. But again, thus far, I don't know if he's committed. And I believe that just as we're discussing these things here, we need full-blown discussion and debate and exchange of ideas, values, and priorities, so that the public in this crisis, we have so many crises. We have a fiscal crisis, schools are shut down. We've got prisoners being let out of prison. We have people that should be in jail being let out on no bail. We have threats to cut public safety funding. I just did a show this last week where one of these anarchist groups was putting pressure. They put pressure on a guy that manufactured police equipment like bulletproof vests. They pressured him to sell the company, is what they did. They would leave you guys defenseless. It'd be Barney Fife, maybe with 1 bullet in your pocket, your shirt pocket, maybe, is what, I guess that's what they want. Like I said, I want to thank all of you for what you're doing. Folks, if you want to ask any more questions before we wrap this up, you can go to the comment page on Facebook or the chat button on YouTube. I want to give you guys each an opportunity to kind of just summarize where you're at. We've got 2 issues. Number 1, overall funding. Number 2, people that are in the force wanting to get out. And 3, what is our ability to recruit new people? Who's going to want to go into law enforcement in a day and age where there's a war on cops? Nick, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge concern for us as a board is that there's not going to be qualified people to apply for our sheriff's office because they're concerned about entering this line of work, given all the negative press that's out there and the stripping of our ability to do our jobs. So that is a significant concern when we talk about some of the legislation that we're seeing and some of the talk that we're seeing on a national level to do away with funding for law enforcement.
Dennis?
Yes, hiring and retention has always been an issue for law enforcement going back a long ways, but it's even more difficult today. It's more difficult today for the very reasons that, we had difficulty finding the right people to get the jobs, to give the jobs to before, but now it's even more difficult because good qualified people don't want the job. So, it's just a tough situation for law enforcement to try and get staffing that they need and get the right staffing that they need.
Rob?
So one of the issues that the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office has had for a number of years is mandatory overtime due to staffing. Our agency has been on mandatory overtime since 2003. So the hiring and retention is nothing new to our agency, but now it looks even worse. And where do we go from here? I really couldn't tell you, but it's going to get more difficult. And we're going to have to think outside the box to try to get new people, but this definitely isn't helping at all.
One of our Facebook viewers wants to know about human trafficking. As I mentioned, some of the issues have been downgraded from violent felonies. So that's not helping, but what we've been told is that because we're on the 101 corridor between LA and San Francisco, and that also from Fresno, that people are being trafficked in our region. Do you guys have any comments on that?
Yeah, I can address that. One of my other roles with the sheriff's office is until very recently, I was a detective that handled human trafficking investigations in Ventura County. And I can tell you that we are seeing both commercial sex trafficking and labor trafficking up and down the 101 corridor in Ventura County, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo, as well as throughout the state. And unfortunately in California, we have some of the largest numbers of traffickers coming to our state because of the money that's here in both the community and as well as the resources here that we have in our labor sectors, as well as some of our commercial and hospitality sectors.
Dennis?
Yeah, I think human trafficking is a big issue today and in law enforcement and recognized by law enforcement, not just in California or our area, but throughout the country. And in our county, Sheriff Parkinson has a task force on human trafficking. Chief Lewis at the Paso Robles Police Department has trafficking as a priority. And so, it's a high priority issue at this point in time in our country and locally.
Dennis, I just want to add, Mike from Facebook said you were a great police chief and you're still great.
Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, I mean, I would piggyback what Dennis and Nick said. I think all three counties have a task force for human trafficking. And I know those guys work really hard. But I think one of the problems is it's hard to take people to jail, especially right now. So the deterrent isn't there. These guys are putting in hard work, but like I said, it's hard to get people in jail and behind bars.
All right, Nick's going to have to leave. I want to thank you, Nick, for your service. And folks, I want to tell you that I'm very proud. I'm very proud and gratified that the deputy sheriffs in Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo, all three of them endorsed me months ago, even before most of this stuff blew up, because I have a long history of working with men and women in law enforcement. And Anyway, Nick, I want to thank you for being here with us and for your service to our country and our local community.
Thank you, Andy, for your time. Thank you, Dennis and Robert as well for your comments today. And have a good one. Take care.
All right. We're going to wrap this up in just a couple minutes. I just want to bring up one or two more points if I can. And that is I think we just lost Robert. Oh, no, there you are. Two things. One of the things that's happened, like Santa Maria, I just was at a meeting with one of the deputy commanders in the city of Santa Maria. And as I mentioned, community policing is one of the things that Black Lives Matter wanted dropped. And the point of community policing, and Santa Maria is trying to do this, they're hiring a huge number of young men and women who were raised up in the community to patrol the community and serve the community, establish relationships with the community, including trust and respect and protection. Why on earth would they want to end community policing programs? And secondly, in these inner cities, they're having trouble attracting, for instance, Black officers, because now if you work for the police department, you're considered a traitor to the Black community. And one more aspect of this, and I wrote about this, I've done shows on this for years. There's a street code. Just recently in the San Joaquin Valley, a birthday party got shot up. A couple people died, more were wounded. And in the news report, it said that people at the party would not cooperate with the police. Because there's a street code that it just begets more street violence, that telling the cops is viewed as being a traitor to the code. It begets more violence. This whole thing to me of recruiting people in the community policing and cooperating where the community stands together to protect their community, we're witnessing an attack and an undermining of that, which is so basic. It's unbelievable. Dennis, your thoughts on this?
Well, it's a cultural thing, the gang culture or criminal activity culture to protect each other. But I think people come forward with information, especially, you talk about community policing. The main thing about community policing was to build relationships in certain communities within your jurisdiction and to create trust between the community officers in that area and the citizens. So they didn't have a fear of coming and talk to the police department because they knew the guy in their neighborhood. They knew the cop in their neighborhood. So that's what community policing is about. It's about developing relationships and trust. And you take that away and that goes away.
Rob?
Yeah, I would agree with what Dennis said. And I think personally, community oriented policing is important. I think it's important for guys in uniform to get out of their cars and walk the neighborhoods they're policing and get to know their community. The problem that we have in our county, and I'm sure it's agency wide, is that takes staffing. Right now, our deputies go from call to call to call to call to call because our numbers are cut. And that really takes a toll on community policing. You don't have time to get out of your car and talk to your community. And I think that's one of the hard parts for getting funding for community oriented policing. It's expensive, but it works. And I think when you get to know your community, they're more inclined to talk to you. Once they have a rapport with you, they know who you are.
Okay, I'm going to have one more question, then we'll probably wrap this up unless other people have more questions. I do want to tell you, those that are on Facebook Live, we're going to do a quick poll on Facebook Live of whether or not people want to see a debate between me and Salud. I hope that you would contact KSBY and encourage them. Tell them KEYT at least has one on their schedule. But, again, farm bureaus, chambers of commerce, and other organizations, League of Women Voters, thus far he's declined one and all. And if you'd like to see a debate between Salud and I, please go to Facebook Live. So and then we'll go to a question from Kendra here in a minute. One of the things that's very, very concerning to people is the number of homeless. So one of my daughters works in downtown SLO. She was asked by her boss to go make a deposit at the bank. She won't do it anymore because she got accosted by a homeless guy downtown SLO, middle of the day. This used to be deemed one of the top 10 livable communities in all of America. And she doesn't want to go downtown. And in Santa Barbara, it's been that way on State Street and Milpas for a long, long time. Could you tell us about the problems that these communities are having because the cops really don't have much in the way of tools to deal with these people?
Yeah, I can talk about that, Andy, a little bit because so for me, I was born and raised in Lompoc here in Santa Barbara County. And, you know, I'd say over the last 5 to 7 years, we've really seen a decay in our city. And a lot of it's due to the homeless. They're attracted to Lompoc because we have a big riverbed that's on the outskirts of town. So they've really set up a city within our city down in the riverbed. Most of these people are drug users. A lot of them have mental health issues. And, you know, Lompoc does not have the resources or the money to deal with this. So you've really seen a decay in our city, and it's sad. Our police force is a reactionary police force. We don't have they go from call to call and pick up the mess as they go, but there's not being anything proactive done. They're not going out and trying to get guns off the street or get drugs out of, the schools. They're just responding to these stabbings and shootings and cleaning up the mess. And then they'll go to the next call. And it's the homeless is the same way. They have no tools. A lot of these drug charges, they can't arrest people. They can go out and write as many tickets as they possibly can. But they don't have the time. They don't have the resources. So it's really hit our city hard.
Dennis, was this guy that shot up the cops up in Paso, was he not homeless or what, or did he have a domicile?
No, he was living on the streets. And so, yeah, homeless has been a problem. Back in the days when I was policing, we had the riverbed camps, and we formulated a plan, and we got other agencies involved. We didn't just run people out of the river. We got agencies in there to help them and relocate them. And there was a big push, and we did a good job on getting the tent cities out of the river. That because of changes in money with the police department and programs going away, those things stopped. And now we have a problem in the riverbed, just like Rob said. And, the government tells us what we can do and we can't do in the riverbed as it relates to habitat and as it relates to pollution, but yet they allow people to go in the riverbed and use it for their bathroom, use it for their dump. And it's contradictory to what they want to do and keep the riverbed clean and safe.
I can tell you, I grew up in Lompoc as well. And in fact, I didn't live very far from the riverbed. And we used to go ride motorcycles in the riverbed, go hunting and all sorts of things. Well, the police chief in Lompoc invited me for a tour of the riverbed. Folks, there were people living in that riverbed for over 15 years. The epitome and the highlight of this thing, people don't believe me, but I've got documentation and I actually saw it. There was one guy that had dug a three-room dwelling into the bank of the riverbed. He had a wrought iron fence and a doorbell for his place, a wrought iron fence and a doorbell powered by solar panel. There was these other people that had two construction guys. They worked full time. They built probably a room that would have been up to code in terms of how they built this thing. They were just living down there rent free. And again, what Dennis said, if a farmer had gone into a riverbed and did X, Y, or Z, they'd be arrested and prosecuted for U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineers, and EPA violations for altering a riverbed without a permit. These guys are living there 15 years. There was a homeless homeowners association. They had a sign up, fenced off area of the riverbed, that if you want to live in this part of the riverbed, these are the rules to live here. There were hundreds of tons, bicycles, mattresses, stolen goods, automobiles, everything, trash piles like you wouldn't believe down there, hundreds and hundreds of tons. And poor Lompoc, which is not the richest community in the Central Coast, the Board of Supervisors did diddly squat to help them pay to clean this thing up.
And we did, Andy, we did pay to clean it up. And, you know, the city spent a lot of money, but they've let them all back in. So
That's right. That's right. Santa Maria, if you go over the bridge, you'll see the tents. They're routinely going in there to clean these tents out of there. Some of the fires that we've had in some places, going back to, I think, even Painted Cave in Santa Barbara was started by a homeless guy. I think one of the big Montecito fires was started by somebody with a fire. So, well, one last question. Kendra, we had talked about human trafficking earlier. She says this was on YouTube. So many of the people in San Luis Obispo County deny it even happens here. How can we educate people to the real and present danger of this?
I mean, we really should just get the stats out to the people, and that's something that's public information. And that's something that we can work on. But it's true. We do a lot of operations in Santa Barbara County dealing with human trafficking, and you don't really hear about it on the news. It's kind of a quiet thing. So we could probably do a better job at putting the numbers out there. But this county spends a lot of money on human trafficking.
Yeah, and the tri-counties of Ventura, Santa Barbara, and San Luis Obispo County, law enforcement's doing a great job, and all three of those counties work together on a lot of crime issues and law enforcement issues. But Bill Brown, great sheriff, was a great police chief, and Ty Lewis, who is the chief in Paso Robles now, is doing a great job. But they're handcuffed, pardon the pun, but they're handcuffed by rules and government laws and so forth that it makes it more difficult for law enforcement to do their jobs.
Great. Well, I want to close with a couple things. First of all, Dennis and Robert and Nick, who's left already, I want to thank all of you guys for serving and for being with us. Again, Dennis, previous police chief Paso, Rob Kirsch, vice president, Santa Barbara County DSA, Nick Odenath, who left, had to leave 5 minutes ago, is president of Ventura County DSA. I want to say a couple things. First of all, this town hall, we've done a couple of town halls now, will be available on Facebook and our YouTube. You can go to the Andy Caldwell for Congress webpage, andycaldwell2020.com, andycaldwell2020.com. Please share this. Secondly, we would appreciate your support. There's about, less than 75 days before the election. Everybody's going vote by mail, folks. It's in the jurisdictions will probably have some polling places where you can drop it off. But the bottom line, you will get your ballot in the mail the first week of October. Watch for it. If you don't get your ballot, call your county clerk recorder and tell them you didn't get your ballot. Last year, two of my daughters were vote by mail because they were roommates in college. One of them got a ballot, the other one didn't. And anyway, so be watching for your ballots the first week of October. Please support the campaign at andycaldwell2020.com. And I want to thank everybody for being with us. We got one last question here. Irene on Facebook wants to know, where are the people being trafficked from? Dennis and Rob, do you know where they're being trafficked from?
Yeah, human trafficking is, pretty widespread on what communities they come out of. They come out of the inner city. The young people are being exploited by traffickers. They come out of other countries. They come from China. They come from Asia. They come from South American countries and south of the border countries. So human trafficking is pretty widespread on where the resources are that the traffickers prey on. And so it's pretty diverse.
Rob, any answer, response?
Yeah, I would agree with Dennis, and I think a lot of the people that we see in our county are coming from the Central Valley. We see a lot of sex trafficking coming out of that region and then down from LA.
All right, a couple closing remarks, folks. Again, I'm the candidate in this race that's willing to stand with law enforcement, and I'm so grateful that they're standing with me in this race. We're having a fundamental breakdown of law and order, respect for our institutions, and we need to do what we can to protect the same. And I can tell you, Salute Carbajal is not working in the same direction as I would. In fact, he has been introducing bills that are actually part of the Breathe Act legislative agenda. We need your help. We need financial help, moral support. We need you to volunteer. You can go to andycaldwell2020.com and sign up to volunteer to help the campaign. You can walk your block. You can make phone calls. You could, for instance, promote our videos. We've done 10 to 15 videos that I think they've been seen some 300,000 times. When you see them pop up on Facebook, you can sign up for our YouTube feed. You can sign up for our Facebook and share those videos. This costs you nothing to hit a share button and tell people to watch that. And in fact, like I said, this town hall will be on YouTube. Ask people to watch it and share it. With regard to your ballot, again, it's going to come out the first week of October. We will have a tool on our website where you can track your ballot. There's a means to confirm that your county clerk recorder got your ballot. They won't, count them or open them until later. But one of the other things is don't trust, and I had a guy that's an expert on this subject, don't stick your ballot in the regular mail. Take it to a drop box, a polling place, or the county clerk recorder's office, or directly to your post office. Because, for instance, Salute Carbajal had a fake press conference last week. This thing was embarrassing. So Nancy Pelosi sent out a directive to all of her minions saying, go make hay out of a post office campaign scheme they have, that Trump's defunding the post office so that he could win the election or steal the election. So in Goleta, a couple of mailboxes got removed from Patterson Avenue. So there was somebody left flowers at the location of this thing, like it had suffered a death or what have you. But there were a couple of different reasons they removed that box. They removed it for vandalism, trash, and people stealing. Well, it got replaced by the time Salute Carbajal had his press conference. It wasn't slated for removal, it was slated for replacement. And anyway, but the point here is you want to make sure when you take that ballot, you take it to a secure location for mail, either, again, directly county clerk recorder. Santa Barbara County is going to have a couple of boxes, like there's one box in the parking lot at the Betteravia Government Center that's secure, and or you take it into the office, or you wait till voting, like Santa Barbara County is going to have their polling places, a number of them. There won't be as many, but there'll be a number of them open for 3 or 4 days before the election. And so we want to make sure your vote counts and that you get it in. The most important thing, if you don't have that ballot the first week of October, you call your county clerk recorder and tell them you don't have your ballot and you want to make sure you get to vote. I want to thank everybody for being here today. And You know, the other thing is watch out for ballot harvesting. Don't give your ballot to somebody you don't trust. Some of the Republican parties will actually collect ballots as well for you, and they'll turn them in directly to the county clerk recorder's office. But we only have a little bit of time to win this. We can win this. We must win this race for all the reasons we discussed today. So Dennis and Rob and Nick, I want to thank all of you for being with us and for serving our community. And I want to thank everybody that participated. And 100% of the people that voted said yes, they want to see a debate. You belong to a chamber, the Farm Bureau, or League of Women Voters. You email and call Salute Carbajal and let the press know in your community. Let your hometown newspaper know, and KEYT, KSBY, and all the rest, that you want not one debate, but a series of debates, because our country's in trouble right now, and we don't want Salute Carbajal ducking his responsibility for something he can't control, i.e. a press conference where he's controlling all the information and doesn't have to answer to any hard questions. So again, thank all of you, Dennis and Rob, thank you again. And thank all of our people that tuned in on Facebook and YouTube, and watch for the video coming out and share it, please. That'll do it for us. Take care.
Thanks, Andy, for all your support.
Thank you.
Yes.